Iran. The denial of human dignity in Iran is an outrage that deserves the condemnation of all who speak out for freedom and justice. The Human Rights Council was founded because the international community has a responsibility to protect universal rights and to hold violators accountable, both in fast-breaking emergencies such as Libya and Cote d'Ivoire, and in slow-motion tragedies of chronic abuse such as Burma and North Korea. We saw this council at its best on Friday when it took decisive action on Libya. We saw it in December's special session on Cote d'Ivoire, where the situation is increasingly dire and there's been a large spike in violence. We must continue sending a strong message to Laurent Gbagbo that his actions are unacceptable and the international community must keep up the pressure. Last fall, this council also took the important decision to create a special rapporteur for freedom of assembly and association. And we have likewise seen a strengthening in the council's approach to freedom of expression. But too often still, we are not seeing a serious enough response to use this institution to advance human rights. Sometimes the council does not act, and its integrity is undermined because it defers to regional relations, diplomatic niceties, and cynical politics. Membership on this council should be earned through respect for human rights. That is the standard laid out by the General Assembly. This council's predecessor, the Human Rights Commission, lost its credibility in part because Libya was allowed to serve as its president. It should not take bloodshed for us to agree that such regimes have no place here. And I must add, the structural bias against Israel, including a standing agenda item for Israel, whereas all other countries are treated under a common item, is wrong. And it undermines the important work we are trying to do together. As member states, we can take this council in a better, stronger direction. In 2009, the United States joined the Human Rights Council because President Obama and I believed we could make a difference by working with you on the inside rather than standing on the outside merely as a critic. And over the past 18 months, we have worked together. We've reached across regional lines in an attempt to overcome what hobbles this country more than anything else, our divisions as member states. The unity of purpose we have forged with respect to Libya offers us an opportunity to continue that progress. As we look ahead, and as the Council completes a review of its own operations, we hope to help set a new agenda based on three principles. First, the Council must have the capacity to respond to emergencies in real time, and it must demonstrate clearly that it possesses the will to address gross abuses, hold violators accountable, and work with governments, citizens, and civil society organizations genuinely committed to reform. Second, the Council must apply a single standard to all countries based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It cannot continue to single out and devote disproportionate attention to any one country. And third, the Council needs to abandon tired rhetorical debates and focus instead on making tangible improvements in people's lives. For example, in this session, we have an opportunity to move beyond a decade-long debate over whether insults to religion should be banned or criminalized. It is time to overcome the false divide that pits religious sensitivities against freedom of expression and pursue a new approach based on concrete steps to fight intolerance wherever it occurs. Together we can and must help this Council live up to its mission and ensure that it plays a constructive role in the days and months ahead. We will face new problems and new challenges, but if we have a firm foundation rooted in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we will chart a steady course. Make no mistake, this popular wave for reform is spreading, not receding. Each country is unique, but many of the concerns that drove people into the streets and squares of the Middle East are shared by citizens in other parts of the world. Too many governments are hobbled by corruption and fearful of change. Too many young people cannot find jobs or opportunities. Their prospects are shaped more by who they know than by what they know or what they can dream. But it is not my mother's or even my world anymore. What has happened with new technologies of the 21st century means that young people know everything that is going on everywhere, and they no longer will tolerate a status quo that blocks their aspirations. Young people in the Middle East have inspired millions around the world, and we celebrate what some are rightly calling the Arab Spring. This is a hopeful season for all humanity, because the cause of human rights and human dignity belongs to us all. So for leaders on every continent, the choice becomes clearer day by day. Embrace your people's aspirations, have confidence in their potential, help them seize it, or they will lose confidence in you. Those of you who were here on Friday, and many of us watching on our television screens, saw the Libyan representative renounce Gaddafi's violent rule. He said, "Young people in my country today are with their blood writing a new chapter in the history of struggle and resistance. We in the Libyan mission have categorically decided to serve as representatives of the Libyan people and their free will. This is the call we should heed. This is the time for action. Now is the opportunity for us to support all who are willing to stand up on behalf of the rights we claim to cherish." So let us do that, and let us do it with the sounds of the young people from the streets of Tripoli to the markets of Tunis and the squares of Cairo echoing in our ears. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that was an extremely powerful speech by the US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, receiving polite applause from other members of the United Nations Human Rights Council, possibly because Mrs. Clinton, while addressing the human rights abuses, particularly in Libya, reserved some criticism for other member countries of this organization for what she described as tired rhetoric, unending debates, and the ability to argue amongst themselves rather than achieve proper human rights progress. Now, I'm going to go to Patty Culhane, our correspondent who's in Washington, D.C., the U.S. capital there. Patty, I mean, I could go through a lot of what she said, but if I summarize it as Mrs. Clinton laying out her vision for a new world order, I don't think that would be too far off, would it?
Well, I think it was striking because obviously all of the focus has been on Libya, but I think what we saw here is what we've seen from this administration. They are definitely trying to put a lot of the focus on Iran, and we're seeing a bit of what some in Washington have called hypocrisy. As you know, many people have criticized President Barack Obama for being late to the game, for waiting days and days to criticize any of the leaders, to side with any of the protesters, and basically they've been arguing that it's not for the U.S. to get involved, that this is not, nobody basically cares what the U.S. has to say. But then what you see right now with Secretary of State Clinton is she went on and said, it's not for us to decide who the leader should be, but she said, here's exactly what we want to see in your elections. Participation open to all. We want you to release political detainees. So I thought that was a bit striking. And then another thing that I think you'll hear from the critics, especially in Washington, because the president is being criticized for not weighing in on Libya until 9 days in. She said the capacity to respond to emergencies in real time, we need to have that. Of course, the question would be then if the Obama administration felt such a sense of urgency, where were they for those first 9 days?
Yeah, she talked about the fact that this was going to be, rightly in her words, called an Arab Spring. But when she was laying out her ideas for these countries and saying that the people of Libya and other nations will decide for themselves, she was only restating what the US administration has said before. And also when she said, if you don't make the choice, this address to world leaders, if you don't make the choice, then the people will rise up and make the choices that they want to make. Again, that was something that had been said before.
And a lot of what she said in this speech is that what we've heard every day pretty much in Washington. Now, critics will tell you that they feel that the Obama administration didn't see this coming, they didn't have a plan, and they've really been sort of shooting from the hip, trying to figure out every day as it passes exactly what to do. And we have seen a very different response from this administration depending on the country. For allies like Bahrain, we've seen the president pick up the phone, urge reform. We've seen statements throughout almost every other day, it seems, from the administration applauding Bahrain for their actions and for their reforms. But again, with Iran, you see this administration trying to focus the attention on Iran as opposed to Bahrain, as opposed to Yemen, basically, I think that they're one of the things that has been talked about in Washington is they've decided that the monarchs are probably going to be stable, so they're putting a lot of their focus there.
Now, she also said that Barack Obama would be meeting Ban Ki-moon in Washington today. I don't know whether this is a routine meeting or whether it's simply because of what's happening. What do you know?
It's simply because of what's happening. It's about 5 hours from now they're going to be meeting, and one of the interesting things is, this administration has been very careful during these crises to keep the president away from the press. So he's going to meet with Ban Ki-moon in the Oval Office, 2 p.m. Eastern time, middle of the afternoon. It wasn't a scheduled meeting, but they're only going to allow still photographers in. And the reason they do that is if they were to allow those video cameras in, just how we normally see the president in the Oval Office, well, then the White House correspondents insist that there has to be reporters, or we simply won't send the cameras in. So they're not even letting the cameras in because they don't want any reporters in, because obviously we would shout out questions and the president may be forced to answer them. So they'll have a meeting. The press secretary will probably come out and say, here's what we talked about. But as for hearing from the president himself on this, probably just going to see a picture.
Thanks, Patty. Now, what about other things that have been happening specifically in Libya? Let's run through a few of them. Shipping sources say that crude oil shipments from the country are virtually non-existent, hit by reduced production, and also, as if that's not enough, because of the bad weather, Libya is the world's 12th biggest producer of crude, and there are reports of more anti-Gaddafi demonstrations in the capital, Tripoli. The Reuters news agency reporting that around about 400 people protested against the Libyan leader in what is known as the Tajura district in the east of the capital. A reporter at the scene says they were soon chased away by Gaddafi supporters, firing shots into the air. Now, our colleague Tony Bertley is in a place called Braiga. That's about 250 kilometers from Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown. And he says there that people are trying to organize themselves to get basic services back and running.
A series of committees have set up now to look at defence, to look at food, to look at all kinds of aspects of daily life now. The schools are not open. Here, it's a bit of a dead zone, and AlJazeera also there's a problem because all the shops are still closed and people are suffering there. You know, considering the vast amount of oil wealth that Libya made, it's very surprising just how poor people are in this area. That wealth did not filter down to the people on the streets, so they're now suffering a great deal. But they have military committees, they have committees, they're trying the best they can to get some organisation. I think there was some kind of concern that the old faces, if you like, of the old guard from Gaddafi are taking over the new positions for the new Libya, and that's not going down well in some quarters. But of course these are interim measures, so it will change in time. But at the moment they're getting on with life the best they can.
Now, foreigners who are trying to get out of Libya to escape the violence are finding that it's very difficult. Thousands of people have been crossing the border into Tunisia for more than a week. These are some pictures from that border area. On Sunday, there were protests about the conditions for those people who've been forced to stay there. Now, in other news, an Iraqi court has sentenced a former British security officer to 20 years in jail for killing 2 contractors. Danny Fitzsimmons is the first Westerner to be convicted by an Iraqi court since the 2003 invasion. He was found guilty of murdering 2 of his colleagues in 2009. The 30-year-old said he acted in self-defense. Jane Araf is in Baghdad.
It's a fascinating case because you have to look a bit at the circumstances, and part of the reason why the court here decided that they would be somewhat lenient, if you will, was that he has a troubled background. This is a